How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of Push Start to Listen, and we've got some interesting stuff to talk about tonight, as well as the plans for how we're going to cover E3 next week. Why don't we get right into things? Let's start things off this week with the announcement that Nintendo plans to open a sort of museum called the Nintendo Gallery. The Nintendo Yuji Ogura plant was built in 1969 to help with the manufacture of playing and Hanafuda cards. It was also used as a customer service center where product repairs took place. This is coming from VideoGamesChronicle.com. I think it's awesome that they're going to open something like this. It says that it's going to include exhibits and experiences. If there's one video game company out there in the world that has just a wealth of crazy things, you know, the things that people would want to see when it comes to video game memorabilia, video game history, it's Nintendo. They've essentially been around the longest. They've amassed probably the largest amount of just stuff. You know, you think about how many consoles they made, how many prototypes they've made, the fact that they've done things outside of video games like making Hanafuda cards. They've been in a business since the 1800s, so I'm assuming that there may be some stuff that's not quite video game related and more about the history of the company. I would love to see a big kind of large-scale video game museum at some point. I love going to museums. Actually, where I live, not too far away, about an hour and a half, is the Strong Museum of Play, which is actually where the National Board Game, Toy, and Video Game Halls of Fame are. I may be wrong on the Board Game Hall of Fame, but I do know that the Toy and Video Game Hall of Fame in there. But if you actually go to the Strong, that's not something you can see, really. They do have, at least the last time I was there, they had a small glass display with some pieces from the collection there that you could look at, but it's not like you're walking through, you know, the annals of this amazing, you know, museum that's full of video game memorabilia, but it does exist in there, and I know that because somebody I know actually donated a piece to the museum and got to see a little bit of the process behind the scenes of how they kind of curate things and take care of things there. They do have a sort of museum in a way if you factor in the fact that the Strong has this amazing room full of pinball machines from all across history, recent machines going all the way back to things from the 70s. And I think they even had a few things earlier than that. And they also have an incredible arcade there that has a sort of mini museum in there. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in some of the glass display cases, but that's something that could easily be expanded upon. Obviously, the museum physically only has so much space, and they have a lot of other things. They have a full-sized, like, mock grocery store in there for kids. So, I mean, you know, space obviously becomes an issue at some point, but I would love to see things like this happen in a larger scale. It's cool that Nintendo is doing this. Obviously, it's going to be in Japan, and maybe it becomes like a tourist destination for hardcore Nintendo fans from around the world. I know that there is a lot of video game preservation stuff happening on the West Coast, where people are accepting donations of old memorabilia, magazines, flyers, all that kind of stuff. I follow some of those accounts on Twitter, and there's definitely people out there doing the work. Hopefully, at some point, somebody can find some financial backing to make, you know, a physical location happen. And if they do, I mean, I think there's plenty of us that would clear time in our schedule to head right out there. Shifting gears in more ways than one, it came out this week on Monday that some of the older Need for Speed games will be retired, which is the term that EA used. This includes Need for Speed Carbon, Need for Speed Undercover, Need for Speed Shift and Shift 2 Unleashed, and Need for Speed The Run. Now, these aren't technically marquee titles in the Need for Speed lineage, but still, you know, they are part of a very popular franchise. Essentially, the reason given was that the amount of players still playing these games doesn't, you know, necessitate them spending the money to keep the games alive and the servers and having people work on maintaining that, which I completely understand. But it is interesting because these are single-player games as well, and I don't understand why that means they have to be removed from digital storefronts. You could just have a warning on Steam or Epic or Origin or wherever you're selling these games that just says, hey, you can enjoy the single-player portion of this game, but you can no longer enjoy the online component. I think that would be maybe a happy medium. Obviously, if you have a used video game store near you, I'm sure plenty of GameStops are rife with copies of these games, so it's not going to be impossible to find them, but it is sad when a major publisher and a major franchise kind of just says, hey, enough is enough, and we are just removing these games from purchase, and unless you got them, you can't get them, at least digitally anymore. Again, video game preservation, it's not going to be quite the theme of tonight's show, but I mean, it is a huge recurring theme in things that I like to talk about because it is incredibly important. There have been so many amazing pieces of music, pieces of literature, pieces of film that are just lost to time. I mean, just a few years ago, there was a Universal fire where a ton of master recordings for multiple musicians were just completely lost. Obviously, all of the fires that happened with the flammable type of film that was used in early movie making, those are lost to time. And obviously, going back in ancient history, the Library of Alexandria being destroyed and stuff like that. It's just a shame to lose anything. It doesn't matter if you thought these games were good or they weren't. It's not cool to see that something that could very easily be preserved just being removed. Now, obviously, of course, these games have been dumped. You can emulate these games. You can still buy physical copies on the secondhand market, so they're not quite lost. But it just kind of gives you that little bit of uneasy feeling that, hey, at any moment, despite how big a publisher is, despite how big a franchise it is, these games could disappear from our digital storefronts, at the drop of a hat. So tell me if you've heard this one before. Electronic Arts reaches out to someone involved in the Call of Duty franchise and brings them in to help shape up their own portfolio of first-person shooters. Byron Bede, who was working at Activision Blizzard on the Call of Duty games, specifically Modern Warfare, shipped while he was there. He's actually been there for quite some time. He's joining Electronic Arts as Battlefield's Senior Vice President and General Manager. EA was quoted as saying, "This signals a strategic, long-term commitment to the growth of the franchise, and if there is a first-person shooter franchise out there that needs some sort of commitment to improving it, it is Battlefield." At one point, Battlefield was absolutely untouchable in my eyes. Battlefield 3, man, that game was amazing online when it came out. I was absolutely obsessed with it. The Bad Company games were incredible. I played a ton of 1942. Those games were amazing, but let's be honest, they got lapped hard by Call of Duty. Now, for a while, they were two very different feeling and playing games, so they had their own audiences. But you could tell that as the gap kind of grew and Call of Duty became that mainstream face of first-person shooters, it was the one on the Mountain Dew cans, it was the one on the Dorito bags. Battlefield obviously had some marketing money behind it as well. You saw commercials on TV, and there were tie-ins on products and things like that. But Call of Duty was kind of, becoming synonymous with the word first-person shooter. And then you have Battlefield starting to play catch-up and starting to maybe mimic what they're doing. Like, oh, Call of Duty's going back to World War II. Well, let's go back to, an older war as well, and, things like that. I would love to see Battlefield make a comeback. I would love to see them just get a shot in the arm. Competition between the two premier first-person shooter franchises out there that aren't in the free-to-play arena, like your Apex Legends, Fortnite, PUBG, all that stuff, but two traditional first-person shooters going at each other. That's just good for fans. That's good for people that want to play good games. And I'll stop using the word good now, but I think you get what I mean. Competition breeds momentum. It breeds that kind of spirit to be like, you know what? I am tired of being in last place. I am tired of just resting on our laurels and slapping the name of this game on there and hoping that the name alone is going to sell units. We've got to do something more. That's what I want to see. I would love to see Battlefield give Call of Duty a run for its money, especially because the last game, Cold War, was not great, because Modern Warfare, the game that came before it, is arguably the best Call of Duty ever released. So you got them on their heels now. They released something that's not that good. They're still fiddling around with their own Battle Royale game. This is your shot. This is as good a shot you're going to get in the near future, because you have no idea the next Call of Duty could turn things right back around and be just as good as Modern Warfare was. So, something to keep an eye on for the future. So our last bit of news this week before we get into our E3 plans and general housekeeping concerns, two large PlayStation franchises in Gran Turismo and God of War. It came out this week that both of those will be coming out not only for the PlayStation 5, but for the PlayStation 4, and are not coming out this year. A lot of people were saying, oh, they delayed the games. They never released a release date for God of War. How can you delay something that didn't have a release date? An internal delay is not the same as an external delay. If you, as the outside public, have no idea when something is coming out, you can't say that, like, oh, they delayed the game, because you would have had no idea what their plans were to release the game. So I think that that's just a silly argument. I think the more important thing here is that they are still having to develop these games for the PS4 as well as the PlayStation 5. The quote that they gave was like, why would we ignore, the 100 million plus people that have a PlayStation 4, which, yes, that makes sense, but what it really means is a lot of people can't buy a PlayStation 5 right now, despite them shipping a ton of them. So yeah, it doesn't make financial sense for us to make these two marquee franchises exclusive on a PlayStation 5 when most people can't get them. It's getting a little difficult now as we're moving into 2022, and I know that obviously COVID kind of just wiped everything out, and you kind of have to pretend that the past 2 years has only been 1 year. It's a shame because obviously being tethered to older technology means that you can only do so much, because you have to make sure that that game can still run in a stable frame and the older system. You can't just go balls to the wall on the PlayStation 5 version and have the PS4 version launch, at 10 frames a second and barely held together by Scotch tape. So I'm waiting for the day. Hopefully it's in 2023. Maybe some games that get in there at the end of 2022 that just don't have the cuffs on anymore, and they can do whatever they want with the new technology. They can go crazy with the new controller. They can mess around with ray tracing and all that fun stuff. And hopefully by next Christmas, when maybe the first wave of these games are coming out, people will be able to more readily purchase a PlayStation 5 and not have to get them through a weird lottery system like I got mine. Hopefully you just be able to walk into a Target or Walmart and be like, oh, PlayStation 5, I will take one of those. But yeah, these games are going to sell like crazy. People have been waiting for a real return to form for Gran Turismo. I wasn't a fan of God of War, but that game is beloved. A lot of people really, really dig that game. It just wasn't for me. But I can recognize the fact that, man, that thing is going to be a system seller when it comes out. So you got to wait a little bit longer than you would have. But to be honest, if this didn't leak and then they kind of followed up, you wouldn't have known that it wasn't supposed to, that it was not going to come out this year. I think there was a lot of people holding out hope that, God of War was going to be out this year. And I think that was wishful thinking before anybody had said like, oh yeah, by the way, it is definitely not coming out this year. So let's talk about E3 because it's next weekend. Now, I know that I have another episode of the show coming out in between now and when E3 begins, but I figure I'd give everybody a little bit of a heads up so you're not getting stuff the same day. So next Saturday is Ubisoft and Gearbox. I will be doing the Ubisoft conference, filming my reactions to it. Gearbox, I honestly just don't care enough about Gearbox. So for Gearbox, I'll get to that, what I'm going to do with that stuff in a little bit. So Saturday, you're going to get an episode of this show, and you're also going to get the reactions to the Ubisoft press conference. Shifting over to Sunday, we've got a couple of big ones. The Xbox and Bethesda game showcase I will be doing. That will be up on the channel. Also that day is Square Enix's presentation. Initially, I didn't plan on doing that until some stuff leaked about what could be shown there, and now I'm very excited about it. And I'm very curious, so I will be doing both of those. I may actually have a guest with me for the Microsoft, Xbox, and Bethesda game showcase, but I'm not positive. And then Monday, there's just a bunch of interviews and presentations. It's not like a full-scale press conference, but Tuesday is the Nintendo Direct, and that is likely the announcement of the new version of the Switch console. Now, for the stuff on the weekend, I'm going to be able to watch it live as it's happening, film the reactions, pop them right up on YouTube as the day goes. Tuesday, I have a day job. I absolutely cannot film in the middle of the workday to do that. So when I get done for the day on Tuesday, I will do my reactions to Nintendo's Direct. I'm sure, but by then everybody's gonna be spoiled, and it's not like anybody's coming to me first for this stuff anyways. But if you are interested in hearing what I have to say about the stuff, that'll be up on Tuesday night. And then that leads us into some housekeeping about the channel. So first off, I want to say an incredible thank you to everybody that watched the arcade light gun video that came up this past Monday. I got some really, really nice comments and feedback about it from people that watch, and that means the world to me. I like the way that video came out, trying something new with the way I filmed it, and I think it worked. All of the other stuff that gets announced to E3, the stuff from Gearbox, the stuff from the Future Game Show, the Warner Brothers stuff, all of that, I'm going to compile what I find to be interesting out of that huge lump of news and then just stream of consciousness talk about it in just kind of one lump sum. Thanks everybody again for watching, and we'll be right back here next Saturday morning for another episode of Push Start to Listen.